Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So I am so excited to jump into today's crafting video because if you tuned in to Sunday's YouTube live, I made some crescent moon wreaths and they came out beautiful. Well, we talked about doing some tutorials with some fellow crafters where they could show us their skills and show us how to make something. So I thought the perfect person to start out this series would be my sister Callie. So here is my sister Callie. She is going to be teaching us how to make some scrunchies today from scratch. So I'm gonna flip the camera around and I'm going to let her take over my channel today, and she is gonna walk you through step by step how to make your very own scrunchies at home. So if you're ready to learn how to make your own scrunchie, keep watching.
Alright guys, I started out doing bandanas. I have a dog. If you're like me, obviously you know from some of her polls, if you're following her on Instagram, we're dog lovers in this family. So I started with bandanas and I had all this extra material I'd get for my bandanas. It's wasteful. So scrunchies were the perfect thing, and it's in right now. Everyone wants scrunchies. They're great gifts. They're great to sell. So it's just a thin, small piece. Any of them. It just depends on the size of the scrunchie you want. Like I've got some thicker ones, flannel, cotton. You can really use any material, velvet.
But this is really like the smallest you can go.
Yeah. It becomes harder. It'll take longer. Like this is even almost too small because when you fold them...
How wide is that exactly? Like hold it up to this so they can see the measurement.
This one is about 3. You want, I would say 4.
So 4 inches wide.
Long is up to you. You don't really need a long piece. It's helpful. The great thing, if you just want to do scrunchies, Joann Fabrics, Walmart, Hobby Lobby has some. They have fat quarter squares. You can probably get about 4 out of these. And you really don't have to do any measuring. You'll just cut straight across into 4 strips. Or I just went to Joann's and got off of their scrap material. This is $4. Originally it's 10. And it gave me half a yard, which is perfect. And it's nice material. The other things you need... You don't necessarily need peeking scissors, but I love peeking scissors. Sorry if you ever have your tongue not work. It's good. So it makes little triangles at the top of your material just so that it doesn't break. See, I didn't peek this end and the threads are breaking out and those will get stuck in your sewing machine. The other thing you'll need is elastic. You can buy small. I bought a small pack. This is a 1/4 inch. I've been using those in all of mine. I also just bought, I prefer the 3/8 braided elastic. Now the amount of elastic you want to use, I would start with 8 or 9 inches for the fact that they only go so far. So this was my first one, it was an 8. And it depends on the thickness of your hair, or whoever's you're gifting it to. My last one I cut to 7 inches because I wanted it to be tighter. I like, when I put my hair up, I like it to be tight. I don't like it to be loose or flopped around. So it kind of depends on you, your preferences. I also like to use a dowel rod that you can find in a pack, like a large pack, Walmart, any crafting store, anything like that. It helps to turn your fabric inside out. It's a whole lot quicker than doing it by hand. You'll see what I mean here in a minute. I also use a mat. For scrunchies, you really don't have to measure anything, but I do have a nice mat to measure things because occasionally I do like to check the length of my elastic. And then last, of course, you need a sewing machine. I mean, you could do it by hand, but it'll take you a whole lot longer, and I'm not very good with hand stitching. So I definitely prefer the sewing machine. You'll need your thread, obviously, threaded bobbin, which I've already done. So Erica picked out this fabric. Erica, I don't know if you guys have talked to her enough or seen enough of her stuff to realize or get the impression that she has an animal print leopard, mostly, problem.
Yeah, they know.
So, like I said, a fat quarter is a great way to start if you're just specifically doing crafts or scrunchies. If you do regular crafts and you have extra, like these are just all extras from my bandana. You don't want to waste this, but you really can't use it for anything else other than maybe patchwork. If you're patching on jeans or a blanket or anything like that. But they were good for scrunchies. I'm gonna use my peeking scissors to cut my fabric. Oh my goodness. Actually, you know what? Normally you would fold it 4, but because I think we're gonna do a thicker scrunchie, just for the fun of it, I'm gonna fold it a little bit extra. That way you can probably get 3 out of it if you wanted to. Like I said, it depends if you want a really big scrunchie. So this pattern's really big, but this one I did small because like I said, I've been using my excess. Scissors are great for your material not breaking at the end. You definitely want to cut your end pieces because those are going to become important so that the threads don't get caught in your machine and then you have to pull out all of your thread, cut it.
So this is what the peeking scissors do. It makes like this zigzag cut on the edge of your material, and that's what she's talking about.
The great thing about scrunchies, they don't have to be exact. Listen, I'm left-handed. I have never been able to cut straight or do anything straight lined. Nothing has to be straight. None of your lines, it doesn't have to be exactly sized. You don't have to measure anything. And it honestly doesn't take as much time as most people would think. And the way I'm sure you would find under other tutorials that do it a different way. But this is the easiest, quickest way that I've found to do scrunchies. So to start, I'm gonna flip it to the back side of my fabric, which is almost always your faded side. And then I'm gonna cut myself, like I said, we'll do, I'm gonna do 7.5 because my scrunchies have been a little long, so I wanna try and make them to where they're a little bit tighter. You can use your peeking scissors to cut them, or you can use regular scissors. I have both. You want to take the end of your elastic, or one end of your elastic, to the end of your fabric piece at the middle and as close as you can to the end. So I'm going to just sew this end. I don't need to sew along the whole side. I just need to sew the elastic onto the fabric. And then a lot of the newer sewing machines have a back stitch. I always back stitch these. You're going to want to back stitch everything for the last couple stitches, but because my elastic's so thin, I always back stitch the whole thing because you don't want it to come undone, because if it comes undone after you've completely done your scrunchie, it's not a scrunchie anymore. You're always going to pull your thread out so you don't lose it and have to rethread. I always cut, you'll always have your end thread. I always cut it as I go, because I don't want a bunch of thread at the end that I can't find the end to cut. Next thing, flatten out your fabric again. And then we're just gonna scrunch it up. We're just gonna roll it up. And then you're gonna take the other end of your elastic and the other end. And so you didn't like scrunch that up any type of way. Like you literally just bundle it up. Just bundle it up.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
You just need to get to the other end and not sew anything else.
Oh, okay.
So that's just to get it out of the way. So I fold it like that, kind of like it's rolling.
Like an accordion.
Mm-hmm. We're going to sew that as close to the edge again as we can. Okay, I've cut all my excess off. This is what it should look like. It looks a little funny, but that's the idea. Okay, now we're going to turn it to get our elastic on the outside. The main part is you want to put your fabrics together ignoring your elastic. So I'm going to match them up as best as I can, and you're folding them together inside out. Again, ignoring your elastic. I'm going to match it up as best I can. You want it like this. I'm just sewing along the wide edge, the whole thing. But this second part, I always forget this and I mess up my scrunchies. I have to start over. I have to pull all my thread. So try not to be like me. You want to only start your thread about 2 inches in. So I'm going to start down here instead of up here. Make sure that your elastic isn't getting caught up, and remember, you want to skip at least 2 inches. You can do more if you want. That's just more you have to sew later. The smallest amount as possible, but I would recommend 2 inches. And then you're sewing as close as you can, so they're folded and we're sewing them together. You're sewing as close as you can to the edge. When I first started, I didn't want to sew as close to the edge because I was worried that I'll have holes. You can always go back over them, but sewing as close to the edge as possible makes it to where you have a thicker scrunchie and enough room to turn it right side out. A lot of people pin their edges together because they're afraid that they'll come undone or they'll get uneven, which they can. The fabric, if you're not paying attention to holding it while you're sewing, it gets uneven. I just stop every once in a while or slow my threading down to make sure that my fabric is still together. Now, I'm getting close to the end. I'm only going to do a couple more. I'm slowing down because, again, this end as well as the front end, you want to do at least 2 inches on both sides. You want to keep them open and not thread over them. Now, here's where it comes into play that we wanted those 2 extra inches on both sides kept open. We wanted those kept open for a couple reasons. One of the reasons is we're going to turn it inside out. If I were to sew this all together, I'm over here trying to turn this inside out, and that makes it harder. Whereas I left these 2 sewn, so it makes it easier to turn inside out. Now, you can turn it inside out by hand. That'll take you a little bit longer. I found better trick, a stick, scissors, any thin object will work just fine. Anything you can get in your scrunchie. I use the stick. I shove all the fabric in, and then I'll use the stick to push it through. It's just a whole lot quicker. If your elastic comes undone, you'll have those 2 inches to re-sew it. But if we sewed correctly, back stitched over it, it shouldn't undo even pushing it through.
Ah.
Now this part I consider the hardest part. None of it's hard. It just takes a minute. So you want to make sure your ends are unfolded. I recommend having pins. You only need 2 just because we're going to sew this end and this end together. Now your elastic, it's obviously bungee. So we want to keep it as straight as possible for the end. So I'm taking a pin. I'm going to straighten this out. And I do it on the back side just to keep like an inch or 2 straight for it to, you don't want your elastic cord to come bunching back up when we're about to sew all this together.
So this is just going through the elastic.
Yeah, I put it through the elastic and trying to keep as much of my fabric up here straight. And we're going to do it to the other side too.
And that's just to make it easier to sew.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, you want to keep it as straight as possible because if you get it bunched up, you're going to sew extra fabric. Okay. You're going to not sew your elastic because we're going to sew these ends together, including sewing our elastics together.
So completing the scrunchie.
Like I said, this is the hard part for me just because I hate finding the fabric. I hate finding the elastic. But it's quick. It's not hard. We're going to take both of our ends to where our outside showing. Your elastic does not need to match up. Most people think that you need to match your elastic on your elastic. I prefer you want to match your ends as best as you can. Now, like I said, we don't measure our fabric, so your ends might be different sizes. That does not matter. We're going to fold it all in right side out, and you're not going to see any of it if there's extra to your end. But I do start with one end matching the one end up. And you got to be careful because your scrunchie end will start flipping in. You don't want to sew any of this with all of this. We're just sewing along the straight flat ends.
Just the edges.
Just the edge. I'm going to start as close to the edge as possible on both ends. I'm just back stitching so my stitching doesn't come undone. Cut all my excess thread. So your whole end was just stitched together and my elastic was stitched together. Notice how my elastics are not in the same place. That's okay. If you feel more comfortable matching up the elastics and sewing them together that way, but you're sewing along the whole edge. So either way. Now we're just going to pull. Don't forget you have pins in there you want to take out. So now we just have this little hole. Well, this is a large hole. Because it's a larger scrunchie. We're just folding them in. Your peeking ends, you're gonna sew from the edge of your thread to the other edge of your thread. We're folding them in so we don't see our peeking ends. I'm gonna try not to get too much excess because that'll make your scrunchie smaller. Just folding in and just enough. Both sides are folded in to hide the peeking and to sew them together. Like I said, every time I start, I always go 1 or 2 threads and then I'll back stitch 2 or 3 just so it's not coming undone when it's pulled, because we're always pulling with scrunchies, whether we're putting them on our wrist, in our hair, on our backpacks, wherever. You want to make sure your ends stay folded in together as you go. So I go slow when I'm sewing and I stop every few inches and I make sure it's still folded in and it's put together. Like I said, you can make those holes smaller by not doing the 2 inches. I always do the 2 inches because I feel like that's plenty of room. It's not too big, it's not too small, and it makes it easier to turn inside out. You can do smaller, it just might be a little bit harder and take a little bit longer to turn your scrunchie right side out. So I'm gonna cut off all my excess. Now this is the only seam you should see. The rest of it was turned inside out. It was everything we sewed inside out and then flipped. And then that's just your seam.
Nice.
Perfect scrunchie. And that's really it.
And there you have it, guys. We have our very own homemade scrunchie, thanks to my sister Callie. So thank you so much for teaching us how to do that. As always, guys, if you like this video, please let me know that you liked it by giving me a big thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop a comment down below. If you have any questions for my sister specifically, I will be sure to pass that on to her and get her answers back and respond to you guys. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, don't forget to click that subscribe button down below so you don't miss out on any other crafting tutorials. I don't know what to like say after that. Just want to do some scratch? No. I'm gonna do it with a zoomed in. Always, no. I don't say that. What? Wait, what?
We're completing the circle of life.